Let's look at the observations versus experiments. What is an experiment? So in an experiment, the researcher is in control of certain variables. That can potentially give you a value of a variable being measured. Okay. And that variable is called the response variable. It's the variables responding to the other variables that are being controlled, the values of those variables. Okay, so this is under controlled conditions. How is it different from an observation? Well, in an observation, or say an observational study, the researcher is not in control. So there's no controlling at all, no control factor, and instead just observes and records. So, for example, if I want to, I wonder what the weight is of certain individuals. I'm not in control of why that weight is the way it is. All I can do is measure the weights. Okay. So let's look at some of these and see if we can tell the difference. A German study compared 118 patients with a rare eye cancer called uveal melanoma to 475 healthy patients who did not have eye cancer. Okay, the patient's cell phone use was measured using a questionnaire. So what we're doing is measuring and using this questionnaire. The eye cancer patients use cell phones more often than average. Is this an observational study or an experiment? So again, we're collecting data from two groups, and we know which group is which. And what we're measuring is cell phone use. So what are we measuring? And I'm going to guess a unit here. Let's say in hours. So I'm going to measure cell phone use in hours. Are the researchers in control of any other input? Well, the answer is no. No, they're not. They're just measuring what the cell phone use is. So they're just observing. Okay, so this is an observational study. Okay, how about this next one here? An Australian study consisted of selecting 200 mice, chosen because the breed was susceptible to cancers. 100 mice were exposed to 2.5 hours periods a day to the same kind of microwaves with roughly the same power as the kind transmitted from a cell phone. The other 100 mice were not exposed. After 18 months, the brain tumor rate for the mice exposed to cell phone radiation was twice as high as a brain tumor for unexposed mice. This is an observational study or an experiment. So in this case, one thing I can notice is that we're selecting these 200 mice, and 100 mice were exposed to 2.5 hour period a day to the same kind of microwaves. So there are two groups, but the researchers is controlling, in this case, the amount of radiation they're receiving. So yeah, I think 100 mice are purposely exposed to microwaves for the same duration each day. While the other 100 mice are not. Okay, so yeah, we're imposing a treatment. So this is an experiment. Okay. Okay. And just to kind of complete this a little bit, so you notice let's see, the 100 mice were not exposed. And what's being measured after 18 months, the brain tumor rate. So basically, we're looking for tumors, right? And in this case, the tumor rate. So what's going to happen here? So they're going to look at the mice, for example. So let's say this is from the microwave group. And all the data is going to look like this, like, yes, there's a tumor, no tumor, no tumor, no tumor, tumor, no tumor, no tumor, no tumor, tumor, and so on, right? So when we measure this, is going to be, okay, the number of mice, which is 100, and how many, let's say, in the, what I call this microwave group, so I'm put a little W here for microwave, or had a tumor. So let's say that, 15 did. Okay, and then in the other group, which is the control, no exposure, maybe it looks like this, no tumor, no, and so on. So again, what we're measuring here is a rate, which again can describe as a proportion. So let's say at the other one, was it twice as high? So maybe in this case, maybe 6 out of 100 were had a tumor in this particular group. Okay, so let's call this p hat control, and this is p hat microwave. Okay. So in the case, again, we're measuring the tumor rate. What proportion of times we see a tumor. All right, let's do the next one here. So again, notice this data is categorical. And what we're doing is summarizing that data using a proportion. So what is anecdotal evidence? So anecdotal evidence is not based on the use of randomization. So even when you do a observational study, there's got to be some type of randomization taking effect in order for this to be valid. But in anecdotal evidence, there is no randomization. Or if there is, it's not what's called scientific. And what does that mean? Well, it means that there could be potentially bias in the process. So when we do scientific, we should do a process that eliminates the bias. as much as possible. But this one is not. So it's not using randomization. And what does it do? It is just based on what you observe. Personal observation. Yes, this is just casual. Okay. After all, when just by living, you're observing many things. So when you observe many things, then you can start coming up to some conclusion, okay, based on what you observe. And so we do this all the time. I collect every day lots of anecdotal evidence. So the issue here, though, the issue is that the information may not be representative. Okay, so you may arrive at the wrong conclusion. Representative of what? Of the population at large. It doesn't mean that what you're seeing is not true. It's just that proportionally it may be incorrect, right? You make I start assuming, well, gosh, everybody is doing this, or like that we have a homeless crisis, and yes, there's a lot of homeless people, but the vast majority of the population is not homeless. But after a while of seeing and people in this situation, you still much like to think that it's happening more than it actually is. I guess you could say that yeah, well, I mean, if anybody homeless is not a good thing, which is absolutely true. Now, is anecdotal evidence important? So again, what's wrong with it is that it may not be representative. That's what the issue here. So I want to kind of answer this question because it's not really explained anywhere. But the answer is yes, it is. It is. Anecdotal evidence, I like to think of it as a spark. So, again, it's a spark that leads researchers to do proper research to try and figure out what is really happening, okay, on what is being observed anecdotally. And really the question that we're trying to answer when we see anecdotal evidence, is there something really there? And I've noticed that's vague, isn't it? But that's sort of the basic idea. So yes, anecdotal evidence is important because it is the thing that would drive us to then do the research to try and determine if what we're seeing is really occurring. Noticed again during the pandemic, there was a lot of anecdotal evidence, and then research had to follow it up with well, some data that hopefully will be representative. And the one that everybody's familiar with is, do masks work? Is it true that the masks were working? And again, there was anecdotal evidence that it does work. There's some research that shows it works. And so of course, there was also some that said, well, it may not work as good as you think. And the problem is that we really couldn't do an experiment with a mask wearing. We were just relying on observational data, and then that data may not be fully representative. After all, when we say, yes, the masks work, what do we mean by that? I mean, there's a particular way to wear a mask. How often do you wear a mask? In what context do you wear a mask? Do you wear a mask 100% of the time? And then there's the reality of how people were using masks. So, and then what type of masks are we talking about? So there's, again, when we say that do masks work, there's a lot of things we need to discuss about what that statement even means.